Standing at the edge of the marble fountain, Elena pressed the delicate chain of her grandmother's necklace between trembling fingers. The summer sun danced on the water's surface, scattering golden light across the plaza, and for a fleeting moment, she felt the warmth of happier days, days before loss, before fear. But as a careless gust of wind whipped her hair, her grip slipped. The necklace soared from her hand, its pendant spiraling through the air before vanishing beneath the rippling water. Time froze. Elena's heart pounded so loud she feared she'd drown in its echo. The crowd around her stilled, as if holding its breath. Every memory tied to that necklace, her grandmother's lullabies, the secret promise they'd shared, seemed to sync with it. Panic surged. Without that heirloom, a part of her past would remain forever submerged. Before she could move, someone plunged into the fountain. Water exploded outward as a dark shape sliced through, arms reaching for the glinting pendant resting on the fountain's basin. Eyes wide, Elena watched as he surfaced, droplets cascading from his dark hair, the necklace clutched triumphantly in his hand. In that moment, their lives intertwined, two strangers bound by a single act of courage, each carrying secrets they dared not share. Elena pressed the recovered necklace to her chest as she stepped onto the cobblestones, her pulse still echoing the frantic rhythm of her panic. The stranger, dark hair plastered to his forehead, water dripping from his sleeves, bent to offer it back. His eyes, deep pools of curiosity, flicked from the pendant to her face. She swallowed hard, words tangled on her tongue. I thought I'd lost it forever," she murmured, voice wavering. The weight of the heirloom felt suddenly heavier against her heart. He straightened and held the necklace out. "Here," he said, voice low but steady. "It seemed important to you." Something in his tone, gentle, respectful, stirred an unfamiliar warmth. But before gratitude could settle fully in her chest, the plaza's clock tower chimed the noon hour. Elena's stomach clenched. She remembered the meeting that awaited her. "My apologies," she said, taking a step back. "I need to get to the gallery. I'm late." His brow furrowed. "Gallery?" She hesitated. Normally, she avoided mentioning her work in this city. Rumors of prejudice seeped through every whispered conversation. Today was the day she was to present her first paid commission, a portrait meant for the mayor's office, and her nerves were already frayed. Now this unexpected encounter threatened to unravel her. "Yes, the art gallery on Riverton Street." She forced a polite smile. "Thank you for saving my necklace." Without waiting for a response, she pivoted and hurried away, every step echoing with self-doubt. Behind her, the stranger watched until she turned the corner. He tucked the necklace into his pocket, his expression unreadable. At the gallery's grand entrance, Elena squared her shoulders. The heavy oak doors loomed like sentinels. Steeling herself, she pushed them open and was greeted by a rush of cool air and the scent of fresh canvas. Inside, assistants fussed over frames and spotlights. Mrs. Caldwell, the gallery director, a tall woman with silver hair and a hawk-like gaze, approached, skirts swirling. "Elena, you're late," Mrs. Caldwell said, voice clipped. "The mayor arrives in 15 minutes." Elena offered the necklace, briefly glimmering at her throat as silent evidence of the morning's chaos. "I'm sorry. There was an incident." Mrs. Caldwell's lips twitched, as if to dismiss the apology. "We've been through this. If you can't manage your time, I'll find another artist." Heat flamed in Elena's cheeks. She opened her mouth to retort but thought better of it. Instead, she bowed her head and stepped aside. Minutes later, the mayor strode in, an imposing figure in a tailored suit, gold-trimmed lapels catching the gallery lights. Elena stood beside her portrait, a striking likeness of a local childhood home, warm dawn light spilling across weathered bricks. She had painted it for the city's bicentennial, an image of heritage and perseverance. As the mayor approached, Elena felt every eye shift to her. She remembered the summer fair's whispering crowd, remembered how easily they could turn admiration to contempt when they realized she was only half their own. She forced her features into calm neutrality. The mayor extended a hand. "Your work is exceptional, Miss Alvarez." "Thank you, sir." Elena forced a smile. Inside, her heart pounded. He lifted his gaze to the painting. "This captures something deeper than architecture. It feels alive." Relief flooded her, easing the tension in her muscles. But even as she basked in the praise, a faint disturbance tickled the back of her mind, an echo of the fountain scene. She reached up, fingertips brushing against the necklace. A soft chime of a camera shutter pierced the moment. Reporters swarmed forward, lenses clicking. Elena's cheeks burned. She wasn't prepared for this kind of attention, especially with questions about her background already swirling in the local papers. One reporter cleared his throat. "Miss Alvarez, congratulations. But some in the community question whether you, as someone with mixed heritage, truly represent our historic narrative. What do you say to that?" A hush fell. Eyes darted between her and the portrait as though her answer would determine its very worth. Elena's breath caught. Every instinct screamed for self-protection. She glanced downward, tempted to retreat behind measured apology. But then her gaze fell on the painting's sunlit frame, on the memory of mornings in that old home, learning to paint under her grandmother's patient guidance. She raised her chin. "Art transcends the divisions we impose. This home belonged to my family and to the town. Its walls whispered stories of every child who looked out those windows, of every generation that persevered. I paint what I feel and remember, and every story matters." Murmurs rippled through the room. Mrs. Caldwell's eyes glinted, approval, astonishment. Elena couldn't tell. The mayor's dark gaze remained inscrutable. Then, before the tension could tighten further, a soft voice drifted from near the doorway. "Well said." Elena turned. The stranger from the fountain stood there, hands tucked into his wet jacket pockets. His hair still bore flecks of water. He offered a small nod. Shock jolted through her. How had he found her? And why did his presence feel both comforting and alarming? The reporters, sensing a new story, pivoted toward him. "Sir," one called, "you recovered the necklace. Care to comment?" He shook his head. "I'm just glad she got it back." His gaze met Elena's for an instant, steady, earnest. In that charged moment, Elena realized the true conflict awaiting her would not be confined to paint and canvas. It would be woven through her identity, her community's prejudices, and this unexpected connection to the stranger who'd interrupted her carefully controlled world. As the mayor extended his hand to complete the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Elena's heart fluttered with uncertainty. And for the first time, a spark of hope that maybe, with courage, she could defy the judgments around her and embrace the unexpected. The gallery lights brightened, shutters flashed, and an invisible line had been drawn between the safety of solitude and the peril and promise of stepping into the currents of change. Elena inhaled, steadied herself, and prepared to dive in. Over the following days, Elena found herself haunted by the stranger's appearance at the gallery. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw his earnest, rain-kissed face and the way he had intervened without hesitation. At the same time, whispers in the cafe where she sketched beside old brick walls, comments on social media threads praising her art but questioning her place in the town's story, and Mrs. Caldwell's clipped reminders of deadlines all piled onto her chest like stones. One humid afternoon, Elena returned to the fountain where the necklace had nearly been lost. Its surface glinted placidly in the sun. She fingered the pendant, now cleaned, polished, and hanging securely against her heart. As she traced the intricate filigree, footsteps approached. She looked up to find the stranger standing on the rim, drying his jacket on his pant leg. "I wondered if you'd come back," he said, voice still calm. "I live across the street." Elena hesitated. The memory of his dive both thrilled and unnerved her. "Thank you for what?" He tilted his head. "Saving the necklace. I saw how you panicked. I'd have done the same for anyone." She studied him. He wore a simple white shirt, rolled to the elbows. His eyes, dark and clear, held no judgment, only a quiet concern. But the world around her often judged first and asked questions later. I'm Elena Alvarez." "Simon Miller." He offered his hand. As their skin met, a small thrill of connection traveled up her arm. They fell into easy conversation. She learned Simon was a local history teacher who spent free afternoons restoring the old fountain's stonework. Her cheeks warmed when he listened intently to her tales of painting, of chasing sunlight across weathered walls, of her grandmother's lullabies sung in the same plazas. He didn't pity her mixed heritage. Instead, he seemed fascinated by the tapestry of her roots. Still, external pressures pressed in. That week, Mrs. Caldwell summoned Elena to the gallery's back office. The director's tone was icy. "The mayor's office wants more diversity in our upcoming bicentennial exhibit," she said, tapping a printed email. "Your commission is at risk if you can't produce additional work that speaks to the local narrative." Elena's heart sank. She'd poured her soul into the portrait of her grandmother's home. Now she needed to create more art on demand, art that might feel inauthentic. When Mrs. Caldwell's gaze flicked to the pendant at Elena's throat, she added, "Perhaps draw on your personal history." Back at her cramped studio apartment above the cafe, Elena set up her easel. Outside the window, the fountain gurgled. She stared at the blank canvas, her reflection wavering in the glass. Memories surfaced. Her first brushstroke as a child, the day she'd tried selling sketches at a street fair and been shooed away by gossiping passers-by. Doubt whispered that she should abandon this dream and take a proper job, as her late father's relatives often advised. She shut her eyes and breathed deeply, recalling Simon's steady gaze at the fountain. Summoning resolve, she sketched the pendulum rhythm of the water wheel in the background, the old oak bench where her grandmother once sat, and a younger version of herself, hand outstretched toward a gleaming necklace. With each line, the scene grew more intricate, an allegory of reaching for belonging, of risk, loss, and unexpected rescue. When Simon arrived the next afternoon, Elena met him at the foot of the fountain. Coaxed by an unspoken invitation, he traced his fingers gently along the portion of the canvas she'd secured to a makeshift easel. His eyes lit. "This captures both fear and hope," he said. "You've painted the moment before and after the leap." Her breath caught. "I don't know if it's good enough for the bicentennial exhibit." He studied her face. "Art isn't about fitting into someone else's story. You tell your own." Elena's chest tightened with conflicting emotions. Gratitude for his encouragement, shame at needing it, defiance toward the gallery's demands. Yet every word he offered seeped into her, fueling a courage she hadn't known she possessed. Meanwhile, rumors swirled that a local critic planned to review the gallery's next show. Elena feared a harsh mention of her outsider status. The night before the exhibit's preview, she awoke in a cold sweat, the canvas before her illuminated by lamplight. Panic took hold. What if the necklace slipped again, this time into an abyss of derision? At dawn, she returned to fetch Simon's opinion. He met her at the gallery doors, still wearing the rumpled jacket from their first meeting. "I'm here to help," he said simply. Together, they carried the canvas into the hushed grand hall, where beams of morning light filtered through arched windows. Elena noticed the mayor's portrait already installed on one wall, upright, approved. She placed her work on the opposite side. Below it, she arranged the recovered necklace in a small velvet case, a silent testament to its journey. As guests arrived, town elders in embroidered shawls, young families clutching programs, Elena's pulse thundered. She saw Mrs. Caldwell nod approvingly, the mayor offer a crisp smile, and the critic lean forward, lips parting in surprise. Simon stood at her side, his presence a calm beacon. When the critic approached, he ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. He paused before Elena's canvas and bent low. In the hush that followed, Elena dared not breathe. Finally, he straightened. "This piece, it transcends mere commemoration. It is a narrative of vulnerability and rescue, of how the act of saving another can bind us in ways we cannot predict," he said. Turning to Elena, he extended a single finger in approval. A ripple of applause spread through the hall. Elena's heart soared. She cast a glance at Simon, relief and gratitude shining in her eyes. He gave a small, proud smile. In the weeks that followed, Elena's rising reputation brought new commissions, invitations to speak at community events, and the opportunity to mentor young artists. Yet with each success came fresh challenges. Debates over who qualified as a keeper of local history, offhanded remarks at town council meetings, and the constant battle within her to trust her own voice. Through it all, Simon remained at her side, sometimes as confidant, sometimes simply as silent companion. They restored the fountain's worn stones together, repainted its rim, and mounted a small plaque commemorating, an act of bravery that reminded us. Heritage belongs to every hand willing to preserve it. As Elena polished that plaque one evening, she realized how far she had come. From the trembling girl terrified of losing her grandmother's necklace to an artist whose work dared to challenge prejudice. The stakes continued to rise, both in her art and in her heart. But now she faced them buoyed by the knowledge that rescue could come from unexpected depths, and that true belonging begins when one dares to dive in. Late one stormy evening, Elena stood atop the fountain's circular rim, rain slicking her hair to her temples. Fists clenched at her sides, she gazed down at the sculpted stone basin where so many memories, joyous and painful, had pooled. Tonight, the air felt charged with more than electricity. The town council had called an emergency meeting to debate whether her upcoming mural on the eastern city wall truly reflected local heritage. Critics whispered that a woman of mixed background had no authority to depict their history. Elena's blood pounded. This was more than art, it was her very right to belong. The council chamber's oak doors groaned as she entered, dripping raindrops onto the polished floor. Dozens of townspeople filled the benches, their faces masked in candlelight, some expectant, some hostile. At the head table sat Mayor Harrington, arms crossed, flanked by Mrs. Caldwell and the stern council chairman, Mr. Reed. On a narrow easel beside them rested a small replica of her fountain canvas, a reminder that her unofficial narrative had already threatened the establishment. As the chairman pounded his gavel, Elena felt the weight of every gaze. "Miss Alvarez," he began, voice echoing off the paneled walls, "we understand you have completed sketches for your mural, but several members feel the subject matter. Your own family's story is unrepresentative. They propose we commission a different artist." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elena's heart hammered so fiercely she feared it would shatter her ribs. She recalled her grandmother's voice. "Art is the language of truth, mihija." Gathering courage, Elena stepped forward. Rainwater dripped from her sleeves in oily rivulets, but she scarcely felt the chill. "Council members, neighbors, this mural is more than my story. It is a celebration of every hand that has shaped this city, whether born in these streets or arriving from distant shores." Her voice quavered but grew steadier with each word. She lifted the small canvas to show them. The fountain scene, her moment of loss and Simon's dive. "This fountain has witnessed centuries of history, weddings, farewells, laughter, despair. In that water lies the essence of our community's spirit." Mrs. Caldwell's lips thinned. "This is anecdotal. We need grand historical events, not personal fables." Elena met the director's gaze. "Personal fables are history. My grandmother taught me that stories passed from one generation to another, through song, through memory, through art, are how we preserve who we are." She set the canvas down and drew the necklace from her neck, holding it aloft so every candle flicker illuminated its filigree. This was nearly lost, yet someone risked everything to retrieve it. That act of compassion, the willingness to dive in for another, is the heart of our town's legacy. A single cough broke the silence. All eyes turned to Simon, standing in the chamber's shadows. He stepped into the circle of light, water droplets still clinging to his coat. "I'll speak for the council if no one else will," he said quietly. "Yesterday, I taught my students that history isn't just names and dates. It's the moments when ordinary people show extraordinary courage. That dive wasn't a stunt, it was a testament to hope." He paused, chin lifted. "If we erase these stories because they're too personal, we lose our humanity." A hush fell. Even Mr. Reed's stern facade flickered. Mayor Harrington leaned forward, studying Elena's determined face. "Miss Alvarez, you've made your case." His voice was measured. "Council, all in favor of commissioning Miss Alvarez to complete the mural, embodying both grand events and personal narratives, signify by raising your hand." Fingers rose slowly, then more rapidly, until only a small cluster remained down. A clear majority. A collective breath exhaled. Elena felt the tension in her limbs dissolve, replaced by a fierce glow of triumph. But as the gavel fell, a sharp voice rang out from the back. "This is a mockery of our history." A local historian, known for his rigid views, slammed his cane against the floor. Several others jeered, their faces contorted in anger. The victory felt fragile, perched on a knife's edge. Elena's gaze flicked to the gallery director, whose mouth was a tight line. Then to Simon, whose steady presence gave her strength. She lifted the necklace again, voice ringing across the chamber. History is many things, public triumphs, yes, but also personal moments of connection. If we deny either, we deny ourselves. The echoes of her words settled into the walls. A tense pause followed, then, as if released by an unseen signal, the chamber erupted into applause, first polite, then heartfelt. Elena's chest swelled, tears mingled with rain on her cheeks. She stepped back, pressing the necklace to her heart, knowing this confrontation had not only secured her commission, but affirmed her place in the tapestry of the town's story. Outside, the storm had passed. Lanterns glowed golden, and as Elena exited the chamber arm in arm with Simon, she felt the weight of fear lift. Ahead lay a grand blank wall and the promise of new art, vivid, uncompromising, honest. And in her veins, the unshakable knowledge that true belonging often demands the courage to dive deep and emerge, heart in hand. In the days following the council's vote, Elena's life swirled with both celebration and the steady hum of new responsibilities. The blank brick wall in the town's east end, once a silent sentinel to passing years, now awaited her vision. Each dawn, she carried paints, brushes, and her grandmother's necklace to the site, where Simon met her beside the scaffolding. Under his steady gaze, Elena sketched the mural's broad outline. At its center, the fountain's basin cradled the fallen necklace, rays of water arching skyward like protective arms. Surrounding this tableau, she wove scenes of local history, farmers tending fields at first light, children skipping stones along the riverbank, townspeople gathering for harvest festivals. Nestled into this panorama, she painted likenesses of neighbors who had shared stories with her. Mrs. Hale the baker, offering loaves with a smile, old Mr. Walker, tuning his fiddle beneath the linden tree. And in a gentle cameo, the art critic who'd first praised her work, seated with a notebook on the gallery steps. With each brushstroke, Elena felt the weight of scrutiny lessen. Passers-by paused to watch, some with smiles of curiosity, others with familiar skepticism. But Simon's presence, handing her brushes, fetching fresh rags, pointing out details when the sunset cast long shadows across her drafts, became a reassuring constant. He neither directed nor critiqued harshly. He simply believed. One afternoon, a group of schoolchildren trailed behind their teacher as she led them past the mural in progress. Their whispered excitement reached Elena's ears. "Look, that's her necklace. She painted the baker from Turtle Street. My grandma was there at the founding feast." Their animated chatter rippled outward, and soon the whole block thrummed with anticipation. Unsolicited, a local shopkeeper placed a wooden bench beneath Elena's scaffolding, offering her lemonade and shade. A team of volunteers swept away stray paint chips and kept curious dogs from trailing muddy paw prints into the drying sections. News of the mural spread beyond town limits, and a small regional newspaper ran a feature, lauding the project as a tapestry of inclusive heritage. The article quoted Elena. "We each hold threads in this tapestry. My story is one strand, but when woven together, it becomes something greater than the sum of its parts." By the mural's completion day, even long-standing skeptics lined the pavement, umbrellas held aloft against a gentle drizzle. Mrs. Caldwell stood near the ribbon, expressions softened into cautious pride. Mayor Harrington tapped a mallet against the podium and invited Elena forward. Elena's heart fluttered at the sight of the finished work, a riot of color and motion filling the once blank wall. The central fountain rose, lifelike, water droplets catching the drizzle, the chain of her grandmother's necklace gleaming bronze against sunlit spray. Around it, history pulsed in vibrant vignettes. As Mayor Harrington cut the ribbon, applause thundered across the plaza. Elena felt tears warm her cheeks. She stepped back to take in the crowd, young and old, faces bright with connection. Among them, Simon watched with a quiet smile, raindrops clinging to his coat like tiny diamonds. That evening, at a small reception in the gallery, Elena stood before guests once more, but this time with confidence born of hard-won conviction. Critics and fans mingled, sipping wine and discussing favorite details of the mural. Mrs. Caldwell found Elena and offered her a steady handshake. "You've brought our history to life in ways I never imagined," she said earnestly. Elena thanked her and then caught Simon's eye across the room. He slipped through the crowd and held out a small, wrapped package. "For you," he said softly. Inside was a handmade sketchbook, its leather cover embossed with the fountain motif. On the first page, he'd inscribed, "To Elena, may your art continue to dive into every heart, just as you dove into ours." Elena's throat constricted. She wrapped her arms around him, the sketchbook pressed between them like a shared promise. In the weeks that followed, commissions poured in: murals in neighboring towns, portraits for families who saw themselves in her inclusive vision, collaborative projects with local schools to teach children about art and heritage. Yet through each new opportunity, Elena remained grounded by the lesson she'd learned at the fountain. That courage to act on compassion ripples outward, transforming hearts and strengthening community. Late one evening, after a day of lecturing at the high school art department, Elena returned home to find Simon waiting on her doorstep. He took her hand and led her down to the fountain, now softly illuminated by energy-efficient lights. Together, they knelt by the basin, the water's gentle murmur speaking in familiar cadence. Elena released her grip on the necklace this time and let it rest on the stone edge. "I almost lost this," she whispered. Simon tucked an arm around her shoulders. "You almost lost more your belief in yourself, but you didn't let go." She smiled, leaning against him. The fountain glowed beneath moonlight. The necklace, still gleaming, was a silent witness to her transformation. Elena closed her eyes, breathing in the cool night air. The city around her felt both expansive and intimately connected, a living canvas of stories, woven together. And at the heart of it all, she had found her place, her voice, and the courage to keep diving in, no matter how deep the waters became. Elena stood before the completed fountain restoration plaque, Simon at her side, reflecting on the journey from panic to pride. Where once she had trembled at the thought of losing a single necklace, she now understood that true worth lay not in possessions, but in the acts of courage and connection they inspire. Gazing into the fountain's clear waters, she saw not only her own reflection, but the faces of the community she had helped to unite. The necklace glinted at her throat, an enduring symbol of rescue, resilience, and the promise that when we dive into one another's lives with empathy, we emerge transformed together.